Hello, my name is Steve Moyes. This is the first of two videos on the Sermon on the Mount. Today I will introduce the main contents of the sermon and some of the questions that it raises. In part two, I will look at some of the critical questions raised by scholars when they study it. Throughout the centuries, the Sermon on the Mount has been seen as the epitome of what Christianity is all about. Teaching like turn the other cheek, love your enemies, no one can serve two masters, and do to others as you would have them do to you, represent an ethical stance that has been foundational for Western civilization. But was such teaching as renouncing possessions intended for all people or just for committed disciples? The picture on the left suggests a rather intimate gathering with his closest disciples, but in the following slide we have a rather different view. You may remember that this is how it is represented in The Life of Brian, if you ever saw that film, where one of the crowd mishears, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for blessed are the cheesemakers," with the amusing discussion to follow about whether this applies to the makers of all dairy products. In fact, the reason for this disparity is because the evidence from Matthew is itself ambiguous. He begins by saying, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. But at the end of the sermon, he says, now when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were astounded at his teaching. Perhaps we are to understand Jesus as speaking first and foremost to his disciples, but as he did so, the crowds got larger and started to surround him. Sermon on the Mount is found in chapters 5 to 7 of Matthew's Gospel, with a shortened form found in Luke 6, which we will discuss in the second video. Matthew's sermon consists of roughly 6 types of material. It begins with 8 beatitudes, such as blessed are the poor in spirit, or those who mourn, followed by a promise such as for they will be comforted. We then have the salt of the earth and light of the world sayings. Thirdly, we have a long section where Jesus quotes certain Old Testament commandments and then says, but I say to you. For example, you have heard that you shall not murder, but I say to you that anger is also wrong. Fourthly, this section begins with the verse, beware of practicing your piety or religion before others in order to be seen by them, and deals with giving to the poor, fasting, and prayer. The first of these leads to the well-known saying, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. The section on prayer includes Matthew's version of the Lord's Prayer, for which I have done a separate video. Fifthly, do not judge others, where we have the famous saying about removing the speck from your neighbour's eye while having a plank in your own. And lastly, we have a number of sections on trusting God, renouncing possessions, and living a simple life. We will look at these in order. The Beatitudes get their name from the Latin version, which begins with the word beatus. The first 4 read as follows. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. There are 2 main questions about the Beatitudes. First, when might the sad and downtrodden expect to receive this blessing? Is it just for the afterlife, or is it something that can be experienced here and now? And second, if it is something to be experienced here and now, is it about the alleviation of their suffering, or the inner strength to endure it? Ulrich Lutz has a useful comment here. He says that we shouldn't try and turn these into universal principles, but read them in the context of Jesus' ministry. Thus, the salvation promised to the poor, the hungry, and those who mourn is already a reality in Jesus' acceptance of the dispossessed, in his common meals with them, and in the joy over God's love experienced in the present. And if we follow in Jesus' footsteps, it can be true in our day as well. Next are the salt and light sayings. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? There is some debate as to whether salt here is referring to its seasoning or preservative qualities. In modern parlance, referring to somebody as the salt of the earth means they would do anything for anybody, and perhaps that captures both meanings. We should note, however, that the saying is cast as a warning. It is possible to lose one's saltiness, perhaps by turning in on oneself, and is not then easy to get it back. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Hiding your light under a bushel is a common saying, meaning something like keeping quiet about your gifts and talents. Some Protestants are wary of the idea that we should let our light shine before others, especially the reference to good works. But the intended result is clear, not our glory, but the glory of God, who gives us our gifts and talents in the first place. Thirdly, commandments. You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, you shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. Some have thought that this is an impractical command or teaching. How can we stop being angry when somebody does something wrong to us? How can we avoid insults? But the answer is given in the next words that Jesus says. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Jesus here gives us a practical example of what he means. We cannot, of course, avoid all anger. Some things just make us angry. But if we are aware that someone has got something against us, if we are aware that we've hurt somebody, then Jesus' illustration is that this tops even your own religious devotion. Today we perhaps might say, even if you are queuing up to receive Holy Communion, but remember that you have upset somebody, then go and sort it out. Nip it in the bud, as we might say, so that it does not fester and lead to something else. The last of the 6 sections on the commandments deals with retaliation and has led to huge debates. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. In terms of positive actions to help people, turning the other cheek and going the extra mile are well-known sayings. But what if the person before you is a bully or an abuser? Are we really being asked to go along with it, not only making it worse for ourselves, but also for others? Do we not have a duty to resist or at least report them? 2 things can be said about this. First, the situation in the 1st century was that Judea was living under foreign rule. There simply wasn't anybody you could report it to. The person forcing you to go 1 mile is probably a soldier insisting you carry his bags, rather like Simon of Cyrene is forced to carry Jesus' cross. Replying, actually, I don't think I will, is likely to have led Simon being crucified alongside Jesus. In other words, this is practical advice for living and surviving as a conquered people. However, Walter Wink thinks there is more to it, as the subtitle of his book suggests: Discernment and Resistance in a World of Domination. In volunteering to carry the soldier's kit bag another mile, he forces the soldier into a situation where at some stage he will have to ask for it back. The person is effectively saying, I know I am under foreign rule, and you have the power to do whatever you like to me, but you will not take away my dignity. He gives similar explanations for the other examples and interprets do not resist an evildoer with do not violently resist an evildoer, a meaning the Greek verb has been shown to bear in certain contexts. Whether such advice applies to nations has led to the opposing positions of pacifism on the one side and just war theory on the other. Piety not paraded. So whenever you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be praised by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Characteristic of Jesus' way of speaking, we have exaggeration. When you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet to draw attention to yourself. And we also have paradox. Do not let your left hand know what your right is doing. Mentally impossible, of course, but evocative of avoiding calculation. Be ruled by their situation and compassion, not your own position. 5, do not judge others. In a survey among non-church people, the question was asked, what puts you off going to church? One of the main answers given was, because I will feel judged. Jesus says, why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your neighbor, let me take the speck out of your eye, while the log is in your own eye? The image is, of course, ridiculous, but all the more memorable for it. Before you attempt to criticize someone, check out whether prejudice or preference is distorting what you see. 6, trust God and live simply. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap, nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. It is easy to see 2 flaws in this reasoning. First, if you are poor and do not know where the next meal is coming from, being told that life is more than food is insensitive, to say the least. Food is absolutely necessary to continue living. Similarly, although the picture of birds storing food in barns is amusing, the fact is that unless they spend weeks carefully building nests to hatch their young, they will die out. Nevertheless, there remains something deeply challenging about these words. Do we spend too much time worrying about our comforts that we forget what is really important in life? In an earlier passage, Jesus says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Or as we might put it today, it is who you are that is important, not what you own. In conclusion, the Sermon on the Mount confronts us with searching questions about ourselves, our relationship with others, and our relationship with God. It is all the more effective in presenting this teaching in vivid metaphors that capture the imagination. Jesus could have delivered a treatise on simple living or harboring prejudice, but the images of birds storing in barns and planks in eyes is far more memorable. In part 2, I will discuss some of the more academic questions that arise from this material, such as why Luke has blessed are the poor and hungry instead of poor in spirit and hunger for righteousness, as in Matthew. But thank you for watching this video. Please look out for part 2.